The dust swirled in golden spirals as the stagecoach rumbled to a stop outside the Silver Spring station, and Jessie Porter stepped down into the familiar dirt of the town she'd fled 8 years earlier. At 26, she was no longer the frightened girl who'd escaped in the dead of night, but a woman who had built a life of her own in Denver as a schoolteacher. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her blue bonnet, not from the exhaustion of the 3-day journey, but from the knowledge that everything she'd run from still waited here, in this unchanged frontier town. "Miss Porter, your luggage," the driver called, dropping her weathered trunk onto the ground with a thud that matched the beating of her heart. Silver Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1878, looked frozen in time, as if the 8 years she'd been gone were merely a blink in the town's existence. The general store still had the same faded sign, the saloon still echoed with piano music in the middle of the day, and the distant mountains still stood guard like silent sentinels over the valley. "Jessie? Jessie Porter, is that really you?" She turned at the familiar voice to see Martha Wilson, the telegraph operator's wife, hurrying across the street, her face alight with surprise. "It is indeed Mrs. Wilson," Jessie replied, managing a smile despite her nerves. "Lord have mercy, we never thought you'd set foot in Silver Springs again after." Martha caught herself, her expression growing uncomfortable. "Well, after everything. Your aunt's letter said you'd be arriving, but I scarcely believed it." Jessie nodded, her throat tight. "Aunt Caroline needs me. Her illness doesn't leave me much choice." "Such a shame about Caroline. She's been asking for you, since the doctor said there wasn't much time left." Martha's eyes softened with sympathy. "You're staying at her place, I assume?" "Yes, though I'm not sure for how long." Just until she couldn't finish the sentence. Until her aunt passed. Until the only family she had left in this world was gone. "Well, let me help you with your things. The town's buzzing with the news of your return. So much has changed since you left." But not everything, Jessie thought as her eyes drifted down the main street toward the ranch supply store. The wooden sign with Owens Trading and Supply still hung above the door, and her heart quickened despite her best efforts to remain composed. "Is Mr. Owens still?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Martha followed her gaze and nodded knowingly. "James Owens passed 3 years back. His son runs the place now." His son, Rylan. The very reason she'd fled Silver Springs all those years ago. "I heard he never married," Martha continued, watching Jessie's face carefully. "Came close once, they say, with that banker's daughter from Cheyenne, but something always held him back." Jessie pretended not to hear as she gathered her skirts and started toward the waiting wagon Martha had indicated. She didn't want to think about Rylan Owens or what might have held him back. She had made her choice long ago, and so had he. The ride to her aunt's small house on the edge of town was mercifully short. Caroline Porter had been the town's seamstress for 30 years, and her modest home reflected her practical nature. The white clapboard exterior needed a fresh coat of paint, and the small garden was overgrown with weeds, but it was still the place where Jessie had found refuge after her parents died of fever when she was 16. "Dr. Burke comes by every evening," Martha explained as they entered the quiet house. "Caroline's been holding on, I think, just to see you again." Jessie's throat tightened as she entered her aunt's bedroom. Caroline Porter lay still against the pillows, her once robust frame diminished, her gray hair thin against the pillow. At the sound of footsteps, the older woman's eyes fluttered open. "Jessie." The voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Aunt Caroline." Jessie rushed to the bedside, taking her aunt's frail hand. "I came as soon as I got your letter." A ghost of a smile crossed the older woman's face. "I knew you would, despite everything. You've always been a good girl." Jessie fought back tears. "Rest now. We can talk when you're stronger." Caroline shook her head slightly. "No time for that, child. The doctor says I'm living on borrowed days as it is." She squeezed Jessie's hand with surprising strength. There are things I need to say to you. Things about why I sent you away that night. You didn't send me away, Jessie protested. I chose to leave. After I told you it was for the best. Caroline's eyes, though clouded with illness, held a sharp clarity. I was wrong, Jessie. So very wrong. Jessie shook her head, unwilling to revisit the pain of the past. It doesn't matter now. I built a good life in Denver. But not a complete one. Caroline coughed weakly. I've watched you in your letters all these years. Always moving forward, never looking back, always alone. I have my students, Jessie said defensively. My school. I'm respected there. But not loved. Not the way you deserve. Caroline's eyes drifted closed. Not the way he loved you. Jessie stood abruptly, her heart pounding. You need to rest. We can talk tomorrow. Caroline didn't protest, her breathing already evening out into sleep. Jessie retreated to the small kitchen, her hands shaking as she pumped water into a kettle. 8 years of carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble in mere hours of being back in Silver Springs. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the Wyoming spring bringing a riot of wildflowers to the hills surrounding the town. Jessie had spent a restless night on the small cot in her old room, memories washing over her like the spring floods that came down from the mountains each year. She rose early, making breakfast for herself and broth for her aunt, who seemed stronger after a night's rest. After ensuring Caroline was comfortable, Jessie knew she couldn't postpone the inevitable any longer. She needed supplies from town, and Silver Springs was too small to avoid its residents forever. The main street was busy with morning activity as Jessie made her way toward the general store. She nodded politely to familiar faces, accepting their condolences about her aunt with grace. The years away had given her perspective. These people weren't her enemies, even if they had witnessed her heartbreak. She was just exiting the general store, arms laden with packages, when a voice called out from across the street. Need some help with those parcels, madam? Time stopped. The voice was deeper, more weathered than she remembered, but unmistakable. Jessie turned slowly, her heart in her throat. Rylan Owens stood on the opposite boardwalk, tall and broad-shouldered in a way the 18-year-old boy she'd known hadn't been. At 34, his face had matured, lines etching the corners of his eyes, his dark hair now threaded with the occasional strand of silver at the temples. He wore the practical clothes of a businessman, not the dusty garb of the ranch hand he'd been when they'd fallen in love, but the cowboy hat in his hands was the same one he'd always worn. I can manage, thank you, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He crossed the street anyway, his stride purposeful. Up close, she could see that his eyes were the same warm brown that had once looked at her with such devotion. Welcome back to Silver Springs, Miss Porter, he said formally, though something flickered in his expression that belied his tone. I heard about your aunt. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Owens. Two could play at this distant formality. I understand you've taken over your father's business. 5 years now. He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. And you're a teacher in Denver, I hear. The fact that he knew anything about her life surprised her. News travels, I see. It's a small town. He gestured to her packages. At least let me carry these to your wagon. Before she could protest again, he had relieved her of the burden. They walked in uncomfortable silence to where she'd left the small wagon she'd borrowed from her aunt's neighbor. I visited your aunt regularly, he said as he placed the packages carefully in the back. Read to her sometimes in the evenings. Jessie hadn't expected that. That was kind of you. She was always kind to me. Even after he stopped, his jaw tightening. Even when others weren't. The implication hung in the air between them. Even after you left without a word. I should get back to her, Jessie said, unable to face the conversation they both knew was inevitable. Rylan nodded, stepping back. Of course. He hesitated, then added, if you need anything, supplies, repairs at the house, you know where to find me. Thank you. She climbed onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins in trembling hands. He stepped back, settling his hat on his head in a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "It's good to see you again, Jessie," he said quietly, the formality dropping from his voice. "Real good." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and snapped the reins to set the wagon in motion. She could feel his eyes on her back all the way down the street. The next week passed in a blur of caring for her aunt, whose condition fluctuated between brief periods of lucidity and longer stretches of sleep. Dr. Burke visited daily, his grave expression telling Jessie what she already knew: her aunt was slipping away a little more each day. During one of Caroline's stronger moments, she clasped Jessie's hand tightly. "Promise me you'll talk to him before you leave." Jessie didn't pretend not to understand. "Aunt Caroline, that was a lifetime ago." 8 years isn't a lifetime, child. Not when feelings run as deep as his did. As yours did. Whatever was between Rylan and me ended when I boarded that stagecoach. Caroline's eyes flashed with unexpected fire. It ended because I made you believe it had to. Because I was afraid. Jessie stared at her aunt in confusion. Afraid of what? Of watching you make the same mistake I did. Caroline's voice grew distant, lost in memory. Did I ever tell you about Thomas Jenkins? Jessie shook her head. Her aunt had never spoken much about her past before Jessie came to live with her. He was a cowboy passing through on a cattle drive when I was 20. Handsome as the devil and twice as charming. A wistful smile crossed Caroline's face. He asked me to go with him to California. Said we'd make a life together. What happened? My father forbade it. Said no daughter of his would run off with a penniless cowhand. Caroline's eyes found Jessie's. I listened. Stayed here. Became the town seamstress. Lived a respectable life. And not a day went by that I didn't wonder what might have been. Jessie felt her chest tighten. So when you saw me with Rylan, I saw history repeating itself. A young man with nothing but dreams to offer. Caroline's grip on Jessie's hand tightened. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was rob you of the chance to find out for yourself what was possible. He was going to Wyoming territory to stake a claim, Jessie whispered, the pain of those last days rushing back. He wanted me to wait, but you said... I said he'd forget you the moment he left town. Caroline closed her eyes in shame. I said he'd never come back, that you'd waste your youth waiting for a dream that would never materialize. And you were right. He stayed here, took over his father's business.
No, Jessie.
I was wrong. Caroline's eyes opened, clear and direct. He came back for you 3 months after you left. His claim didn't pan out, but he'd saved enough to buy into his father's business. He came straight to this house, flowers in hand, ready to make good on his promise. Jessie felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. What? I told him you'd gone to Denver to marry a doctor's son. Caroline's voice broke. I told him you'd asked me not to give him your address because you'd moved on. It was the cruelest lie I ever told. The room seemed to spin around Jessie. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm dying and I can't take this in with me. Tears slipped down Caroline's weathered cheeks. Because he's never married, Jessie. Because whenever your name is mentioned, I see the same look in his eyes that I used to see in the mirror every day of my life. Jessie stood abruptly, her mind reeling. I need some air. She fled to the small back porch, gulping in the cool evening air as her aunt's revelation shattered everything she'd believed for 8 years. Rylan had come back for her. He had kept his promise, while she'd been building a new life, nursing her broken heart, believing he'd chosen his ambitions over their love. And her aunt, the woman she'd trusted above all others, had deliberately separated them with lies. The next morning, Jessie awoke to find her aunt's condition had worsened overnight. Dr. Burke shook his head grimly after his examination. It won't be long now, he said quietly. A day, maybe 2. I've given her something for the pain, but... He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jessie nodded, her heart heavy with both grief and the weight of her aunt's confession. Thank you, doctor. After he left, she sat beside her aunt's bed, holding the frail hand that had once been so strong. Caroline drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing Jessie, sometimes lost in memories of the past. During one lucid moment, she fixed Jessie with a surprisingly clear gaze. Promise me you'll talk to him. Before it's too late. Jessie hesitated, the hurt still raw, but nodded. I promise. Caroline's face relaxed. The deed to the house is in my bureau.
Top drawer.
It's yours now. Do with it what you will. Don't talk like that, Jessie protested. Like a dying woman settling her affairs? Caroline managed a weak smile. That's exactly what I am, child. She drifted back to sleep, and Jessie continued her vigil, torn between the bedside and the urge to seek out Rylan, to confront him with the truth she'd just learned. But she couldn't leave her aunt, not now. Her reckoning with the past would have to wait. It was near dusk when a knock came at the door. Jessie opened it to find Rylan standing on the porch, hat in hand, a basket of food in the other. Mrs. Wilson mentioned you hadn't left the house in 2 days, he said by way of explanation. Thought you might need provisions. The simple kindness, on top of everything else, nearly undid her. Thank you, she managed, stepping back to let him in. His eyes took in her exhausted state. How is she? Failing. Jessie's voice broke on the word. The doctor says it won't be long. Rylan nodded, setting the basket on the kitchen table. I'm sorry, Jessie. Truly. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Did you know? About what she told you when you came back for me? His stillness was answer enough. She told you. Yesterday. Jessie felt tears threatening. Why didn't you try to find me? Write to me in Denver? I did. His voice was rough with emotion. 3 letters. All returned unopened, with a note saying you wanted no further contact. Another of her aunt's deceptions. Jessie closed her eyes, overwhelmed. I thought you'd found someone else, he continued quietly. Someone better suited to the life you wanted. There was never anyone else, she whispered. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with 8 years of lost time. A soft sound from the bedroom broke the moment. I should check on her, Jessie said, grateful for the interruption before her emotions completely overwhelmed her. Rylan nodded. I'll leave you be. But I meant what I said. If you need anything, day or night, send word. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, for the food, and for being kind to my aunt, despite what she did. She was trying to protect you. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw the boy she'd loved in the man before her. From a penniless dreamer with nothing to offer but promises. She was wrong about you. Was she? He placed his hat back on his head. Get some rest, Jessie. Tomorrow will be hard enough. After he left, Jessie returned to her aunt's bedside, her mind churning with revelations and regrets. Caroline Porter passed peacefully in the early hours of the morning, her hand clasped in Jessie's, her final words a whispered, "Be braver than I was." The next days passed in a fog of grief and necessary arrangements. The town turned out for Caroline Porter's funeral, paying respects to a woman who had sewn their wedding dresses, mended their children's clothes, and kept their secrets for 3 decades. Rylan was there, standing respectfully at the back of the gathering, his presence a solid anchor in Jessie's sea of grief. He didn't approach her, giving her the space to mourn, but she felt his eyes on her throughout the service. It was 3 days after the funeral when Jessie finally gathered the courage to visit the Owens trading and supply store. The bell above the door jangled as she entered, and she was struck by how much larger and more prosperous the business looked compared to her memories. Rylan was behind the counter, discussing an order with a rancher. He glanced up at the sound of the bell, and for a moment, His professional demeanor slipped at the sight of her. He quickly recovered, excusing himself from the conversation to approach her. "Miss Porter," he said formally, aware of the curious eyes of his customer. "How may I help you today?" "I was hoping to speak with you," she replied, equally formal. "In private, if possible." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or wariness. "Of course. My office is through the back. Tom, can you finish up Mr. Davidson's order?" The young clerk nodded, and Rylan led Jessie through the store to a small but tidy office at the rear. He closed the door behind them, offering her a chair before leaning against his desk, arms crossed over his chest in a posture that seemed more protective than casual. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said without preamble. "The stagecoach to Denver departs at noon." His face remained carefully neutral.
I see.
"Have you decided what to do about your aunt's house?" "I'm selling it. Mr. Jameson at the bank is handling the arrangements." Rylan nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "Then I suppose this is goodbye." "Is it?" Jessie gathered her courage. "After what my aunt told me, after what you confirmed. Is that all you have to say to me, Rylan?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "What would you have me say, Jessie? That I spent years wondering what I did wrong? That I couldn't understand how the girl who swore she loved me could cut me out of her life so completely? Or maybe that even knowing the truth now doesn't change the fact that you built a life without me, just as I built one without you?" "I didn't choose to leave you," she protested. "I was manipulated, just as you were. And yet neither of us fought hard enough to find the truth." His voice softened. "Maybe that's the real tragedy here. Not what your aunt did, but what we didn't do." The words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. "So that's it? We acknowledge we were wronged and go our separate ways." Rylan pushed away from the desk, pacing the small confines of the office. "What would you have me do, Jessie? Beg you to stay? Ask you to give up the life you've built in Denver to take a chance on what might have been? Would that be so terrible?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. He stopped pacing, his eyes finding hers. "Are you saying you'd consider it?" "I'm saying I need to know if there's anything left to consider." Jessie stood, closing the distance between them. 8 years ago, you promised you'd come back for me. You kept that promise, even if I never knew it. What I need to know now is if that boy who made that promise still exists somewhere inside the man standing before me. For a long moment, Rylan said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand hovering just shy of touching her cheek. "That boy grew up believing the girl he loved had chosen a different path," he said quietly. "He built walls around what remained of his heart, took over his father's business, became respected in this town. But not a day has gone by that he hasn't wondered what might have been." Jessie's breath caught. "And now he's afraid to hope." His hand finally made contact, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Because losing you a second time might break him completely." Tears welled in Jessie's eyes. "I never stopped loving you," she confessed. "I just learned to live with the pain of believing you'd chosen a different dream." The walls in his eyes crumbled at her words. "Jessie," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. "You were always the dream. Everything else was just the means to be worthy of you." And then his arms were around her, and 8 years of separation vanished in the familiar feel of his embrace. His lips found hers, tentative at first, then with growing certainty as she responded, her hands clutching at his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Rylan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not forever, if you're not sure. Just long enough to see if what we had can be rebuilt." Jessie knew her decision had been made the moment she'd walked into a store. "Silver Springs needs a schoolteacher," she said softly. "The children here deserve an education as much as those in Denver." Hope blazed in his eyes. "Is that a yes?" "It's a beginning," she amended. We've both changed, Rylan. We need time to know each other again. He nodded, understanding in his gaze. Time is something I'm willing to give, Jessie Porter. As much as you need. The next day, the stagecoach departed for Denver without Jessie Porter aboard. Instead, she stood on the boardwalk outside the Silver Springs Hotel, watching it disappear in a cloud of dust, Rylan Owens at her side. No regrets? He asked quietly. She shook her head. No regrets. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall as Jessie established herself as Silver Springs' first proper schoolteacher. The town council converted an abandoned storefront into a schoolhouse, and children who had previously received only sporadic education now attended regular classes. Rylan courted her properly this time, with chaperoned dinners and Sunday walks and careful respect for her reputation in the small town. Their history was well known, but this time, they were building something in the open, without secrets or obstacles. On a crisp October evening, as the aspens in the nearby mountains turned golden, Rylan took Jessie riding to the same overlook where they'd shared their first kiss as teenagers. The valley spread below them, Silver Springs a collection of buildings nestled against the approaching winter. Do you remember the last time we were here? He asked as they sat side by side on a fallen log. Jessie smiled, the memory bittersweet. You promised to come back for me. And I did. He took her hand in his, though it took far longer than either of us planned. We're here now, she said softly. That's what matters. Rylan nodded, his expression growing serious. Jessie, I've been carrying something with me for 8 years. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn velvet pouch. I bought this before I left for the territory. Carried it with me every day since, even when I thought you'd chosen someone else. He opened the pouch, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. It's not fancy, it's perfect, she interrupted, her heart in her throat. I had a speech planned 8 years ago. Rylan's voice was rough with emotion. About building a life together, about all the things I would provide. It was a boy's dream then, full of promises I wasn't sure I could keep. He slid off the log to one knee before her. I'm not that boy anymore, Jessie. I'm a man who's built something solid, who knows what he wants and what he can offer. His eyes, so familiar and yet new in their maturity, held hers. I love you. I've loved you since we were too young to understand what that meant. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me. Tears blurred Jessie's vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Rylan. His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home after a long journey. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church on the edge of town, with snowflakes drifting down outside the windows and candlelight casting a golden glow over the gathered townspeople. Jessie wore a dress of deep blue velvet, sewn by her own hand in tribute to her aunt's craft, and carried evergreen sprigs tied with ribbon. As they emerged from the church into the winter evening, snowflakes catching in Jessie's hair like a crown of diamonds, Rylan paused on the steps. The years fell away as he looked at her, and for a moment, they were 18 and 17 again, with the world before them. Your smile hasn't changed since youth, he said softly, tipping his hat with the old gesture that had always made her heart skip. It's always been you, Jessie. Always will be. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at how time had both changed and preserved the boy she'd loved. And you, she whispered. Always you. As they drove through town in a sleigh festooned with ribbons and bells, Jessie looked back at the church, where they'd just pledged their lives to each other. She thought of her aunt, of the mistakes made and the years lost, but also of the second chance they'd been given. Caroline Porter had feared Jessie would repeat her mistake of letting love slip away. Instead, Jessie had found the courage to reclaim it, to rebuild what had been broken, to forge a future from the ashes of the past. As the sleigh carried them toward their new home, the rooms above the store that Rylan had renovated with his own hands, snow continued to fall, covering Silver Springs in a blanket of white that promised a fresh start. "No regrets?" Rylan asked again, echoing his question from months earlier. Jessie leaned against his shoulder, her aunt's final words echoing in her mind. "Be braver than I was." "No regrets," she affirmed. "Only gratitude for finding our way back to each other." His arm tightened around her as the sleigh bells jingled in the winter night, carrying them forward into the life they'd almost lost, now reclaimed through truth, forgiveness, and the enduring power of a love that had survived 8 years of separation to emerge stronger than before. And in the gentle snowfall that transformed the rugged western town into a wonderland of possibility, Jessie Porter, soon to be Jessie Owens, knew that some journeys, no matter how long or difficult, led exactly where they were always meant to.